So there was this old couple who had a daughter. Let's just call her Tatiana. And in their village, it was the tradition to celebrate the feast of St. Andrew I, called on the last day of November. So it was common for the village girls to get together in some cottage and just hang out and bake garlic cakes and laugh and have fun. And then along would come the boys, and they'd bring music and booze, and there'd be dancing, and I'm sure it was a great time except when it wasn't, as tends to be the case with alcoholic parties in youth. And they do this for like a week or more, because apparently they had the freedom to do that. And one evening comes in this handsome young man, dressed very nicely. Everybody just looked at the guy and thought, wow, pretty sure I'd remember him if he was from around here. But he comes in casually and confidently, introduces himself, pulls out little purse of gold coins, and buys a bunch of snacks and beer for everyone, which I'm not sure why they were paying, because I thought it was just a general fun get-together. So we ordered beer and nuts and gingerbread for everyone, and then asked Tatiana to dance, because she's a pretty good-looking girl herself. And they got to dancing, had a great time. He seemed to be somewhat fond of her, because he kind of stuck to her. Not literally. It's not like Velcro stuck on your skin. I'm sorry. And he stuck close to her the evening, and they had a great time. And at the end of the evening, he asked her to see him off. So she walked him a little ways, and because that was just something you could do back then, you know, you just fancy a girl, and I want to put a claim on it. So anyway, he said to her, Tatiana, would you stop? So anyway, he said to her, Tatiana, would you consider marrying me? And she said, yeah, I'd love to, but can I know a little more about you? Where are you from? And it's like, from such and such a place. That's definitely a good answer. So he says, from such and such a place, I work for a merchant. So anyway, went off on his own. Tatiana went home. She spoke to her mother. Her mother was cautiously optimistic. She's like, well, he sounds great and all, but such and such a place isn't precisely what I'd call sufficient answer. So how's about tomorrow? You're gonna go back and hang out with your friends and everything. When he's not looking, take a bit of yarn, a bit of string, and a little loop, and put it over one of his buttons, and unroll the whole thing, and then follow it, and see where he lives. So Tatiana did just that. They went back, they danced some more, he seemed to be even more fond of her, stuck to her the whole evening, chatted with other people, but stuck by her, and had more beer, nuts, and gingerbread, and garlic cakes, I'm sure. And then she went to see him off. At some point she covertly slipped it over his button, off he goes, she unrolls the whole thing as string, and then it keeps going, so she just chases the string, and she follows it all the way to the church. So she tries to see through one of the windows, but isn't really tall enough to get a good view. So she takes this ladder that was left sitting out there somewhere where she could easily find it, and leans it up against the church and climbs in through a window, and kind of walks into the church a bit to see what's going on. So she sees him standing over this coffin. There was a body in it, because it wasn't uncommon at the time to leave the dead in the coffin in the church overnight and bury them, when you're going to bury them the next day. That was all fine and normal and everything, but what wasn't normal was some young guy climbing into a church in the middle of the night and then standing over the coffin and eating the body. Obviously, Tatiana wasn't very impressed with that, and she's like, oh, crap, I gotta get out of here. And she tried to hastily get her way back out of the church, sneak down the ladder, and go home. But in her rush to leave, she bumped against something, obviously scared her, because she's like, he's just gonna turn over here and fly through the air and eat me or something, I don't know. But she goes down the ladder and runs home and keeps looking back, thinking he's following her. She gets home without a sight of him, and she doesn't tell her mom what she saw, because, how would you have that conversation? So the next day, she doesn't want to go hang out with her friends, because he might be there, But her mom's like, no, you're gonna go hang out with your friends, because I'm an overbearing mother, and that's how this story goes. So she did, and she went there, and he was there, and she's like, okay, I'm just gonna play it cool, you know, just talk to him like I have been, and then tell him that some other lad proposed to me, and I actually prefer that guy, or something. He'll go on his way, life will go on. She danced with him, and tried to smile and act normal. When he asked her to walk him home, suddenly she was a little freaked out, like, kind of hit her, like, you know, and friends were like, what are you being bashful for? Go walk the guy home, because we have that authority over you. There's a lot of her listening to other people in this story. Not always to her benefit. So she goes to walk him home, and he says, were you in the church last night? She says, no, I was not. He says, no, seriously, were you in the church last night? She says, no. And he goes, oh, well, okay. Alright. Just so you know, your dad's gonna die tomorrow. Ta-ta! And then he just slinks off into the night, and she goes home and cries, and wakes up the next day to her mom sobbing over her dad's corpse. So her mom went off to the priest to make arrangements for the funeral, and Tatiana was left alone in the house, and started to get freaked out a little bit, just because things had been going not so great over the last few days. And then in a moment of pure genius, she's like, well, I'll go to my friends, because they can make me feel better. Or at least less lonely and scared and stuff. And apparently just conveniently forgot that the guy would just be there. So she went there, and they're like, well, hey, what's wrong? She's like, yeah, my dad died. So they cried with her, and it kind of put a damper on the celebration, as one might imagine, but hey, they were there to comfort her. They were her friends. So anyway, the evening wore on, it came time for everybody to go off, and the young lad, this terrible, horrible fiend, says to her in his charming way, like, Tatiana, this is after he said, Tatiana, I'm terribly sorry for your loss, because, you know, he said, Tatiana, do you, see me off? And she was like, I'm good, thank you. Friends were like, what are you thinking? Go see him off. Because I guess they're still thinking from the perspective of maybe this guy will marry her and make her life better, and that she's just ruining it because she's upset because her dad died. But still, you know, maybe let her make a couple of her own decisions. Cat's using the cat box. Got nothing better to do for the 2 minutes it's gonna take him to take a dump. Making a lot of noise. You done? Good timing. I think that's done too. Hey, bug. Oh, he's going mad. Like, yeah, what's he doing? Makes him feel 2 years younger every time he takes it though. What's he doing? Oh no. So anyway, she goes and she sees the guy off. And he's like, hey, so the other night, were you in the church? She says, no, I was not. He says, okay, well, tomorrow your mom's gonna die, so have a good night. And slips off into the darkness, because he can just do that, apparently. Isn't that right, Ken? So Tatiana wakes up the next morning, her mom's dead. So that's great. So she cries, she talks to the priest, and then doesn't know what to do for the rest of the day, and is distraught. She goes to her friends, which is not as though we've already established that that's a bad idea right now. So she gets there, and they're like, whoa, why are you so pale, what's going on? And she's like, well, my mom died, and then everybody cries with her, and it's probably just putting a real damper on this whole Feast of St. Andrew's celebration week. So there's crying and stuff, and then later that evening, of course, she goes home, and she sees off at this point, he's just like, hey, Tatiana, will you see me off? She didn't even be like, no, and her friends, like, were like, no, go see him off. No, she's just resigned at this point, and he's like, see me off, and she's just like, okay, and what else is he gonna do, you know? So, she's walking along with him, and he says, so were you in the church the other night? She says, no. He says, fine, tomorrow evening you will die. So that's fantastic. So she goes home and cries and cries and has very fitful sleep, as one might imagine, and gets up the next morning and she just does not know what to do. And finally she's like, I'm just gonna go see my grandma. She's super old and blind, and I probably haven't talked to her for like a month, but yeah. So she goes and sees her grandma, and her grandma's like, oh, it's so great to see you, Tatiana. Well, you know what I mean. And she says, so how are your parents? That that went over real well. So Tatiana just breaks down crying and tells her grandmother the whole story. And she's like, I don't even care if the woman believes me, but she's gotta know about my parents and not be too surprised when they come tell her soon that I'm dead too. So her grandma cries with her and everything, and her grandma says, well, I'll tell you just what to do. So I'm not gonna remember this, I'm just gonna read it directly from the thing. So her grandma was like, I'm so sorry that this is happening to you, child. I'm paraphrasing that bit. But she says, go to the priest and ask him this favor, that if you die, your body shall not be taken out of the house through the doorway, but the ground shall be dug away from under the threshold, and you shall be dragged out through that opening, and also beg that you be buried at a crossway at a spot where 4 roads meet. Okay. She went to the priest and cried and begged him until finally he's like, okay, look, if you die, we'll do that, okay? Can I get back to what I'm doing? So of course she just died, and then they did that. They dug out, dragged her, buried her across way between 4 roads. So it was sad. I guess everybody cried except the Fiend. I don't know. So that was that. But eventually this flower grows on her grave, and one day along comes the son of this lord, and he's just in his carriage going along, and he sees this flower, and he stops the carriage, and he and his driver or assistant or whatever, they together, this big gorgeous flower. It's like nothing he's ever seen. And he's like, let's dig it up, with the roots, and take it back and put it in a big pot and see if we can't get this to grow back at our estate, because I am the son of a lord. So they do that, dig it up, take it back to the place, put it in a pot next to this window. All's great. One night, the servant of this lord's son, he just wakes up in the middle of the night, can't get back to sleep, and he's like, well, I'll just go get some water. But as he's going through the house to go get the water, he stops. He sees something out of the corner of his eye, and it's the flower trembling on the windowsill. Or by the window. I guess the pot couldn't fit on the windowsill, but it's sitting next to the window. And the flower's trembling, the petals open, and out just drops a girl. It's Tatiana. And she gets up, and she gets some food and some drink, and after she's had it, she just climbs back up and turns back into a flower. And the servant is just like, what was that? So he tells the Lord the next morning, the son of the Lord, the next morning, and the guy's like, why didn't you wake me up? That sounds awesome. I would like to see that. And he's like, well, stay up with me tonight, we'll see if it happens again. And they stay up, and it does happen again. She's genuinely a beautiful girl, and the Lord's son, he goes up to her and says, will you marry me? And she's just like, yeah, sure, just, can I, not go to church for 4 years? And he's like, sure, you're gorgeous. So I guess just because somebody saw her and asked her to marry her, she didn't turn into a flower anymore, at least doesn't state in the story that happened after that. So he marries her, and they have a child, a little son, and all is well, until one day the Lord's son just hangs out with a bunch of his friends, and for some reason they just get into, a friendly argument over who has the best wife, and all of their arguments is just that, hey, my wife's good looking. Hey, my wife's good looking too, I'd argue more good looking than your wife. They're not like, hey, she's kind, or she's a great mother, or anything like that. I love the way it is in the story, in the written version too, because it's like, well, my wife is handsome, my wife is handsomer still. Well, anyway, he gets to the Lord's son, and he's just like, well, I think we can all agree that my wife is the most beautiful of all the wives any of us have. And it's objectively true enough that they're just like, yeah, but you know, she's a heathen. She doesn't go to church. This really offends him. So he's like, okay, I'm just gonna go to my wife and tell her that, no, I don't care what she has to say, we're going to church, and she's coming with me, even though literally the only stipulation she gave me when she married me was that for 4 years, not her whole life, for 4 years, she wasn't gonna go to church. They go to church, and the guy's just still hanging out. The Fiend, the guy that killed her parents and killed her, is just still hanging out there. So after the sermon, while the Lord's son's talking to somebody else, the Fiend walks up to her, and he's just like, you saw me there that night at the church. She says no. And he's like, okay, well, tomorrow evening, your husband and son will die. So Tatiana's a mess, and this is why I didn't want to go to church, because this guy's just there. And so she cries and runs off when her husband's back is turned and goes to talk to her grandma, who's still alive, thankfully. And she explains the situation to her, and her grandma kind of just nods, like she was expecting that this would be a possibility at some point, and has perhaps made plans. So her grandma hands her these 2 vials and tells her like what they are and what to do with the contents of them. The following evening, her husband and kid die, and then the Fiend just flies in. I don't know if it's literal, but I did find it interesting that was like the only time in the story where it was mentioned as someone flying. And so I like to imagine that he just literally flew into the room. It was like, haha, your family is dead. Did you see me in the church? She says, yeah, I did. You were eating a corpse, and she takes one of the vials, and it's holy water, and she throws it on him. And he just turns into ash and dust and gets blown away in the wind. So I'm wondering, maybe her and her husband and kid were outside, or it maybe flew in through the window, and then she had another window open, and the current carried his dust away. And then the other vial just held the elixir of life, because apparently her grandma obtained that in 2 years, despite being blind and old. Maybe she just spent all the family's resources, knew the right people, I don't know. I mean, she knew the threshold thing, they're very near at a crossroads, so she pours this on her kid and her son, and they come back to life, because that's just a thing. I'm just assuming that her grandma had to take the 2 years to obtain the elixir of life, because otherwise why wouldn't you just use it on her parents? But anyway, Tatiana and her kind of knuckleheaded husband and son live happily ever after, and the Fiend is but a pile of dust on the wind. Next time you're riding a bike or walking down the street or in your car and you got the windows down or whatever, anyway, but somehow a bit of dust gets blown in your eyes by the wind, just imagine that it's a piece of the Fiend. And if he asks you if you saw him eating a corpse, you better just tell him yes. Because otherwise he'll kill your whole family. So that's the end of that one. See you next week. Bye.